Welcome to Seadoo Story Part 3. Last time we took the engine out of this 1993 Seadoo XP because although the body is in good condition, the engine was in very poor condition. It had very low compression and wouldn't run. I've also taken the motor out of my donor boat, the 1994 SPX, that looks like Jaws tried to bite it in half. If you're interested in seeing that machine, it's featured on parts 1 and 2. And this is that engine. It's the same displacement as the engine that came out of this XP, which is now sitting over there. And this engine is in, I believe, good running condition based on some limited experiments that I did with it. It has good compression. I was able to get it running a little bit by just dumping some gas down in the intake. I didn't bother with cleaning both of the carburetors because I wasn't sure where this project was going to lead. And now that the engine is out, I can get a better look at the pistons and cylinder walls. Let's see if magic auto light comes on. There we go. So there's the piston, and I think it looks like it's in pretty good shape. And there's the cylinder wall back there too, and it looks like it still has some of the original hash marks from the honing. I also see some evidence of where the piston rings were stuck. If you look into the prior segments, and I'm talking past occurrences, not the late comedian, God rest his soul, you'll see that this engine, when I first got it, didn't even want to turn, and that's probably because the pistons were stuck because it had been sitting for so long. And those horizontal lines on the cylinder wall, I think, are evidence of that. So while these cylinders don't look perfect, I think they look serviceable, and the compression test tells me the same thing. This had about 135 psi in both cylinders. So that one looks pretty good too. I see a few vertical marks, which generally are bad, and I don't know if that's actual scoring or just some staining or something, but either way, this motor is going in that boat today. So let's get that started. One thing I noticed when I placed these engines side by side was that the wire configuration coming out of the flywheel cover here is different on my donor motor than on the engine that came out of this boat. This has white wires, 2 white wires, where the other engine only has 2 red wires and no white wires. So there's some differences in the electronics. So what I want to do is switch out the stator from this engine, which is the bad engine, onto the good engine over here. Just for fun, I took the head off of this engine, as you can see, just to see what the damage was, because usually if you have a cylinder with no compression, things aren't the greatest, and I thought it would be cool to see what was going on, especially since when I bought this boat, the seller told me that it ran fine, it just needed some carburetor work, and that's why it wasn't running. That should always throw up the BS flag when somebody says needs carburetor work. That either means they don't know what they're talking about, or they do know what they're talking about and they're just making up something. But anyway, look at this piston. Looks like it just got hammered with something. I don't know if it was caused by pre-ignition or, I don't know, overheating. I've never seen a piston like this before. It's just totally worn down here. You can see that piston ring there, and the other one, it looks like an asteroid came out of the sky and slammed into it. If there were any dinosaurs habitating this piston, that asteroid hit, caused a cloud of dust, and made them all extinct. So both pistons are in rough shape, and there's also some scoring on the cylinder walls. I don't remember which cylinder had the low compression. Probably this one, because the ring is exposed and it probably isn't acting as it should. Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, you can see airspace right here between the ring and the cylinder wall, which is no good. That ring should be sealing up tight against the cylinder wall. So this is probably the one with no compression. So anyway, back on track. I'm going to pull off this cover and the corresponding cover on the other engine, switch out the electronics, and then we'll be hoisting the good engine back into the watercraft. I pulled off the flywheel cover on this engine, and it looks like switching out the electronics is a little bit of a job. I need to take off this flywheel, which requires a puller and a big wrench. So I'll get right on that. This nut is difficult to remove. I ended up taking the cylinders off of here, mainly just to take them off and see what the bottom end looked like, but it helped with my nut removal because I was able to put some boards under the piston and wedge a pipe in here and get a bar on my wrench, and all in one fluid motion step on it and turn the wrench with my bar over here like this to loosen up this nut. I've got my puller installed onto the flywheel. This is just a standard flywheel bolt puller, and hopefully things will break loose. I've got it loose now, and you can see with every turn of this bolt the flywheel comes off more and more. So that should just pop right off now. I want to pull it straight off because I don't want to hurt anything behind there. There's definitely some dust or other unknown substance back here. Oh well. Now I'm taking off the stator to put on the good motor. It was attached to the case with 3 Allen bolts. I've removed those, and now I'm going to try to just pry it out. Maybe. Looks like it's caked in there pretty good. After asking nicely a couple of times, I was able to get this broken free, and looks like there it is. Now that I've got the flywheel and stator off of the blown up engine, I'm going to try my luck at doing the same with the good engine. With this engine, I'm not going to take the cylinders off because there's not really a need for it. So instead, I'm going to put some trimmer line down in this spark plug hole. That way, when I rotate the engine and the piston comes up in the cylinder, it will cause a blockage and hold the engine still so I can release this nut. I'll just put a bunch of this in here. I've put in what felt like a lot of this trimmer line, so now I'll get my wrench on here and see if I can't take that nut off. Flywheel off. The stator is now removed on my good engine, and this is really a beautiful sight. This looks like a newer crank seal, and I saw a tag on here on the head that says SBT and then a number, and I looked that up, and it turns out this is a personal watercraft engine remanufacturer. So this engine may have been recently overhauled. I'll choose to believe that it has. That way when I'm riding around, it'll feel faster because I'll think it's a nearly new engine. So the next thing I need to do is put this ugly old stator on here along with the flywheel. Would you believe it that the stator from this engine is slightly different aside from the wiring than the stator on this engine? Specifically, the plate that the electronics mount on this engine is slightly smaller than the one on this engine, and this is a problem for me because it needs to fit very specifically right here within the confines of these little curved tabs. So what I need to do is grind down this plate, which I've already started, so that it will fit in this space because it's too big. So that's just one thing about projects. It's that you never know what you're going to run into, and that's what makes it a challenge. So I've got my grinder here, and what I'm about to do is probably going to be a good catalyst for lots of safety comments, but that's okay. I like to keep things interesting. So here we go. And I think I've taken off enough material from this plate so that it will fit in here. So let's see. Get it lined up with the holes. Look at that. Just perfect. So now it fits within these curved pieces, and I can also move it to adjust the timing if I need to. I don't think I will though. I think I'll just set it at the factory mark, which I think is right here, and call it a day. After a little bit of an ordeal, I've got my stator mounted to the good engine, and I have the timing mark here lined up with the case of the engine right here. I'm not sure if that's correct or not, especially since I'm kind of mixing and matching parts, but I'll do a little research, and if I can't find anything out quickly, I'll just put it together and see how it runs, and worst case scenario, I'll have to take the flywheel back off and adjust this a little bit, but it should be okay. I've got my flywheel back on, and now I'm tightening down this nut. I'm not sure how tight it should be, but it's a pretty big nut, so I'll go almost as tight as it felt that it took to loosen it. Does that sound good? Sounds good to me. Now that the flywheel is tight, I can pull out all this trimmer string, and I'll save it because this is still good trimmer line. Although I'm not typically one to mow the grass. Have you seen this video right here? It attests to that fact. So that's how much trimmer line you need to put in there to stop the piston for loosening various engine bolts. Wires connected. Now it's time to put on this cover. I've done one thing that I usually don't do, and that's think ahead. I've taken a razor blade and cleaned off the gasket material from these exhaust ports and the intake because I thought it would be easier to do it here rather than in the confines of the watercraft. So points for me. The time has come to place the engine into the craft. I've got all my wires and hoses out of the way for a clean insertion, and I didn't mention in any previous segment, but look at this. This is a bonus in this whole adventure. This is a Matco 10mm wrench. This is a high dollar item, and it was just laying there. Buried treasure. So I'm going to get revved up to hoist this into the engine bay. Do you even lift engines? See, this side goes here. Well, the engine is actually in the watercraft, but the next challenge that I face is lining it up so that it mates with this drive shaft correctly. The proper way to install an engine in one of these boats is to pull the entire jet pump, which is this assembly right here, and then get an alignment tool that you bolt where the jet pump goes, and that alignment tool has a shaft that protrudes all the way up to where this power takeoff flywheel is, and then you can match up the engine to where that shaft is, bolt the engine where it goes, and then reinstall the jet pump or the jet drive. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to try to do is just mate the engine to the shaft and then shim the motor here on these mounting points to a position that feels like it's straight with this shaft. By feels like, I'm not quite sure the definition of that yet because I've never done this, but we'll just kind of roll with it and see what happens. So here's a view of the back side of the engine, and I'm going to try to tilt it and get this drive shaft into the power takeoff of the engine. Okay, well that seems simple enough. Can't really tell if it's lined up right. I guess that's the virtue of that tool I was talking about. But it seems to slide in there really easily, so it's not bound up. I'll turn the engine a few times. You know, that seems to be lined up pretty good. I definitely know that this isn't the accepted way to do this, but at this point I don't even know if this machine's going to run, and this is good enough for me. The engine's now in and bolted to the hull, and I've got it lined up satisfactorily to the best of my knowledge. I used a combination of eyeballing the shaft to be straight, and there was a shim here when I took the engine out, so I just went ahead and put it back where it was so as to not break precedent. Next, I'm just going to start putting things back together, kind of reverse of the way I took them apart. First thing I'm going to do is attach this wire to the electrical box, then the starter wire, positive wire, to the starter. I've got my wires all hooked up in the electrical box, so I can close that up now. Starter wire on. Now I'm hooking up the oil injection hoses. The engine that was in here previously was not equipped for oil injection. It had a block-off plate installed down here where the oil injection pump goes. I debated on whether or not I should install the new engine in that fashion and just use premix all the time, but I thought I should utilize the equipment that's here, which is the oil injection system. I'll monitor the engine for the first few hours to make sure that the oil injection system is working. Just to be on the safe side, I'll use some premix for that time. But then once I verify it's working, I think it will be a real convenience for future use. So I've got the hoses hooked up here. The cable will be attached when I install the carburetors. Next, I'm going to install this exhaust manifold. I've cleaned off the mating surfaces on the manifold and on the engine with some lacquer thinner to help aid in sealing and installing the bolts. These exhaust manifold bolts are tough to tighten, even with my shortest little Allen wrench here. We must persevere though. I was getting tired of using my large Allen wrench on these bolts because, as you can see, it really doesn't offer much movement in there, especially on these lower ones. In fact, I really couldn't even access them with this wrench. So I decided to cut down another of the same size, and now it's much easier to tighten these up. Before it was like trying to use a bulldozer to fix a wristwatch or something, but now this is just the tool for the job, even on these hard to reach bolts down here. I know my fingernails are dirty. I always mean to wear gloves too. My dermatologist says, wear gloves. Next time. Sometimes you have to laugh. It's been about an hour since I spoke to you about my magnificent custom Allen wrench. And what happened was, right after I turned off the camera, I dropped said Allen wrench down into the abyss of the engine compartment, and I could not find it no matter how hard I looked. I tipped the jet ski up hoping it would fall backwards. I lifted this side hoping it would get over here so I could see it. I couldn't find it, so I actually had to make yet another one. I made this one out of the scrap from the Allen wrench that I cut up to make the first custom tool because I didn't have another Allen wrench of this size. I heated it up right here and I bent this to a right angle, so it is possible to bend an Allen wrench if you heat it up enough. So I'm going to, I think, glue this to my fingers to tighten these bolts up the rest of the way. Last bolt. And finished. Oh yeah, my manifold is bolted on. Oh yeah, that's why I'm singing this song. Oh yeah, my manifold is bolted on. Oh yeah, I'm ready to have some fun. You ever been hit by the compulsion to burst into song? Me neither. I'm working on getting the exhaust pipe reinstalled now. It's getting late. Things are starting to wind down here at the ranch. I just got back from a really delicious dinner. My wife cooked up a breaded chicken and pasta dish with wine sauce. It really gave me the recharge that I needed to finish up this project tonight. And by finishing up, I mean getting this engine hooked up, ready to go, ready to start. Despite the temptation, I don't think I'm going to try to start it tonight because my little boy is in bed and the exhaust pipe is pointing pretty much right to his crib. So I'll have to fight the urge and try to start it up tomorrow. But in the meantime, I can continue putting on the exhaust pipe, hooking up all the necessary hoses, wires, attach the carburetors, and so on. I've got my pipe bolted on. Now I just need to finesse the water box onto the end of it, and for that I think I'm going to have some help with some dish soap. and we'll clamp it, just like the Beverly Hillbillies. I have an issue. Just for fun, I tried to turn the engine and it locks up. So I don't know what's going on. I'm thinking maybe some of my trimmer line from my ingenious idea earlier is stuck in this cylinder. I can't see anything through the spark plug hole, but I think it's time to take this engine to the guillotine, which means off with its head. And look what we have here. I cannot believe it. Do you remember my hubris? How proud I was of this tool? This tool, which is now blocking one of the transfer ports on this #1 cylinder. Can you believe that? Oh, gosh. Get out of here, you piece of junk. I better watch her. It's going to go down into the bottom end. Oh, I can't believe that. I couldn't find this thing. I thought it was down in the hole somewhere. Well, now I have 2 of them anyway. I can't believe that. I dropped it down into the spark plug hole unknowingly. Wow. What a trip that is. A bad trip. But it doesn't look like there's any damage to the port or the piston because I just kind of turned it with my hand. And now, I wanted to look at the cylinders anyway and see what they look like. They look good. They look really good. So I'm going to call this a night. It's about 10:15 in the evening. I think I'll turn in. Until next time, thanks for watching. Can't believe it was that Allen wrench trapped in there. Oh, gosh. That's a real gas. Bye-bye.